Christmas is coming up. For that, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or not. The point is that we will be having an end-of-year Christmas special, a live event, Wednesday the 11th, December 2024 at the Bernie Grant Arts Centre in Tottenham. Tickets start from just £8. The link will be in the show notes, and we'll be joined by a special guest. So join us. We're going to have fun. We're going to have all kinds of festive, political, smart bants and fun, and we would like you to be there with us.
Yeah, really exciting. It's going to be our second ever live event. We're going to be in North London, and everyone is welcome. And you'll get to hear the podcast, meet us, meet lots of cool people, and we will celebrate the end of a big year, and we'll celebrate all of you, our wonderful community.
Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys and
Every week, Carys and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar. Where are you, Gary? What's your background? Don't know where you are.
I'm in a hotel in Aberdeen.
Ooh.
Yep.
What are you doing to cheer yourself up?
Well, I bought a beanie. I know.
Didn't see that coming.
No, and it's like I'm wearing a midlife crisis on my head. People.
No, do you know what this is? And people who are listening. People are talking about the beanie. Do you know what? I actually clocked your beanie. Gary and I occasionally bump into each other in real life. Very magical, exciting times. And I saw the beanie, and do you know what I actually thought? I thought you've gone full hipster now. It's quite a hipster beanie.
Yeah, see. One of the mums from school said that. She said, "Oat milk in a beanie. What happened to you?"
Oh my God. You're drinking oat milk. Oh, he's gone full hipster. I love this for you. I love you getting into your hipster era, Okay. This is the vibe.
I didn't see the conversation going this way, but yeah, I thought...
Cheered me up, no end.
I thought that'd be a nice hat for... When it gets real cold, you need something that covers your ears, but that'd be a nice... I didn't expect that it would provoke the kind of conversations that it had, which are more or less like, what the fuck is going on here? Who are you?
Put it on again. I want to see it. I want to see it properly.
Okay, I'm going to take off the headphones.
Vibe. Yeah, let's see it. It's chic. I've screenshotted it. I love it. I just think, do you know what? We needed something to cheer us up. Gary's gone hipster. There you go, guys.
Gary's got a beanie. That's not the same thing.
Hipster, like many things, is a spectrum. And you're now on it, Gary. You are now on it. I love this for you. I'm a bit of a hipster. Those who know me know. So I'm into it. What else can we get you doing that's hipster?
I'm not talking.
Grow a beard?
I'm not talking about this no more. What are you up to?
Yeah, I'm good. Still hauling myself out of various pie charts and exit polls from the American election. My social media addiction kicks into overgear at times like this. Also, I'm going to make a pedantic point, but it is an important one. All of the charts people are sharing, we do not yet have robust data about who voted in the recent presidential election. We have American exit polls. And for those of you listening in the UK, Americans do not have an equivalent of John Curtis. These exit polls are not like robust works of all the sophologists in the country locking themselves in a room, which is what happens in the UK, producing a relatively accurate prediction of the result. These are polls conducted by media organizations on election day, which is why you get a lot of other questions about what people think about America and the economy.
Yeah, they are notoriously, it's not that they're notoriously inaccurate, they're just notoriously wayward. They will get some things right, they will get other things wrong, but they are kind of not in themselves unreliable. And the narratives that emerge immediately in the wake of an election are shaped by them.
It is also for British people or people who are used to UK elections. We have this one big exit poll that is done by all the leading academics and has been done for like decades. And there's a methodology and, it's given to all media outlets, and John Curtis and all of his fellow nerds are locked in a room. Like, it's definitely worth, if you're seeing charts with like, this number of black men voted for Trump, like just try and find the source data, because it could have been a 1,000 person poll conducted online, you know, and not to say none of this means anything, but I feel very deluged by very hot takes from a lot of people who predicted the election completely wrong about 48 hours ago, but are now entirely confident that they know what's going on. I won't name. There's a particularly notable one example who's another political podcaster.
You're talking about Rory Stewart.
Kamala.
You're talking about, I know.
Yeah,
I mean, he was,
yeah, you know, I know. I was going to subtweet him, but no, I mean, he just was 2 days ago. He was like, polls are wrong. Kamala Harris is going to win, which was a spicy take then, Gary. But I mean, maybe you're more used to it because this has been your beat as a journalist for a long time. The quickness with which people who had a really strong take that was provably false are then able to give you a new take that you should definitely believe, I've just found really fascinating this year.
I feel like it's a function of this period, which is that the commentariat is at whack with the electorate and they cannot distinguish between what they want to happen and what they think will happen, and they can't distinguish between description and prediction. I found it most telling during the Corbyn years in 2017 when the election came in, and I'm aware that Labour did not win, but they increased their vote share and they increased the number of seats. It was almost like a qualification for being on an election poll was that you had to be taken seriously. To be taken seriously, you had not to in any way think that Corbyn could do anything. The clock struck 10, the exit poll came out, said Labour's going to do better than everybody expects. It's going to be a hung parliament. Now the anchor would say, I'm going to turn to you, who got everything wrong, to tell us what's going to happen next. And in every studio, it was the same. And they were like, I didn't see that coming. And it's like, no. And you know what? Your job is not to predict the future, but you didn't even describe the present. That's the problem. You were dismissive of everything and everybody. And here you are in the studio telling us what comes next.
It feels like, and it felt like this during the campaign, there's a lot of pearl clutching and there's a lot of journalists letting their revulsion of Donald Trump just bleeds into the coverage. I don't know if it skews it, but as you say, it means that we don't always get accurate or the best news and analysis. And I thought a lot about the rally in Madison Square Garden, which when it happened, I was a bit like, Trump people gonna racist, kind of their thing. But we had days of like, this is it. Think how many Puerto Ricans there are in Pennsylvania. That's a game change. A part of my brain was like, but he called Mexicans rapists and murderers. Like, that didn't stop him getting elected. Are we really, like, what's different about this rally this night? And it felt reminiscent of 2016 with the Access Hollywood recording where he was the grabbing by the pussy. Like, however many years on, this is his third presidential campaign, hopefully his last. This sense of like finding him distasteful or shocking and being almost surprised by what he can get away with and what his followers can get away with. It just feels a bit silly.
Yeah, there are two things going on there. And one is in terms of background, the elite nature of journalists and commentators and their desire to dismiss the great unwashed and to almost just say, well, people just shouldn't even have a vote because you're going to get it wrong. And that kind of chimed with the way that the British press reported Brexit, or the liberals in the British press reported Brexit, and how they've done Trump before. I do think there is another thing, though, which is that if we take presidential elections as being a kind of narrative of let's just say a narrative in the past 30 years, the game has changed. And that in the past, a slight gaffe here or there could be turned into a major thing. And with Bill Clinton, the issue was quote unquote character. I remember covering the 2008 election and thinking that Obama had a chance at the point where there was a poll that showed that most white women would prefer to carpool with him than John McCain. And thinking, okay, well, that is kind of interesting because there was this notion of like...
Snap, by the way, would not want to carpool with John McCain.
There was this notion of who would you most like to have a drink with? And with Trump, that has changed. So all of these things which would have been disqualifying just are no longer... That game has changed. And the number of Trump voters that I spoke to 2016 through to 2020 who would say, I don't like him, but he'll get the job done. You know, one woman said, I'd prefer an arsehole doctor who cured my cancer than a really nice doctor who didn't. The game has changed. But I'm with you, and I'm with you absolutely on the pearl clutching and the kind of righteous indignation, because it's like, look, your job ain't to like him. Your job is to describe him. And maybe we would have a better understanding of this game if you were watching the game rather than trying to be a referee.
I think that kind of connects quite nicely to my over the top for the week. This idea of demographics being destiny, which we have heard for a long time in America, and we've also heard in the UK. Did some Googlings. Most people attribute this phrase, demography is destiny, to a French philosopher, Auguste Comte or Comte. So he was alive in like the 1800s. So he definitely wasn't talking about our current political context, but the idea of the phrase was the size and composition of a country's population is the thing that will determine its future. Listeners will probably be aware for some time in the US and in other countries, there's been this narrative that the demographics of the American population, i.e., it's getting less white, will guarantee Democrats victory, like long term. Everyone's going to be black and brown. So basically, right wing people are going to die off. I would say if we could put a final nail in the coffin of that wishful thinking, it really should be this election, even though we don't exactly know the accurate demographic breakdown of who did vote for Trump. What we can see was that there was a pretty massive swing towards him across the country. And again, for those of you who haven't been drilling down, the results in places like New York, Democratic strongholds, also suggest that Trump has pretty significantly increased his vote from 2020. I've never really liked the idea that, don't worry, loads of black and brown people are going to make up the population, so like everything will get left wing. It doesn't feel like a political fix, but I think it's been very provably shown to be false in this election. We talked a little bit about this last week, but the idea that people of colour belong to progressive parties or owe their votes to progressive parties is like pretty gross, but it also ignores the fact that just because you're not white, it doesn't mean the only thing you care about is like racial issues. We all care about the economy. We all care about social services. We all look at political leaders and think, do I want to share a car with them? Do I want to have a drink with them? Do I think they can get inflation down? The other thing that I just want to lift up is that also for at least 10 years now, there have been significant credible voices on the right of the Republican Party and in the UK, the Conservative Party, who have been profiling and focus grouping and analysing non-white voters and saying these people are there for the taking. So in the US, Karl Rove is the famous example, a George Bush advisor. He was talking about Latino or Hispanic voters being natural Republicans well over 10 years ago now, and honing in on the ways that Latino communities in the US were natural bedfellows with the Republican Party. Over here in the UK, Policy Exchange, which is a right-wing think tank, a conservative-aligned think tank, had a black and minority ethnic unit. They did lots of research, weirdly, headed up by Rishi Sunak in sort of 2014, saying to the Conservatives, ethnic minorities are not homogenous. And within them, there are specific groups. So there was a lot of talk about South Asian communities and like affluent black and brown people in the UK. They have our values. They are put off from voting for us because maybe like we used to be racist, and there's a sense that we're hostile to them, but like they are our people. And Lord Ashcroft, big Tory donor, I think over 10 years ago now, produced a report called Degrees of Separation that really is a roadmap for how to heal the divide between like black and brown voters in the UK and conservatives. He looks at the trend and the phenomena and he says, you know, we could be winning more if we win with these voters. Demography isn't destiny because people of colour aren't monoliths. They don't just vote on what you perceive their race interests to be. And also politics is permanently in motion, right? People on the right are trying to appeal to black and brown voters. And if any of the elections of this year have shown us anything, it's like the established world order or consensus or like political norms no longer exist.
They are there for the taking in no small part because the centre left has not delivered for them. On the one hand, you have a right wing that is becoming more savvy. And on the other hand, you have a centre left that has been, if not negligent, then entirely contemptuous. The moment that is praised in Clinton's ascent is his Sister Soldier moment, where he goes to a rap group run by Sister Soldier and she is talking about racial problems and racial difference, and she disses white people. And he uses that moment to trash black people who have an issue with white people in order to show that he is not one of those liberals. He also flies back to Little Rock in Arkansas to make sure that Ricky Ray Rector, a man who has such profound learning difficulties that he asks before his execution to save his dessert for later, that he flies back to make sure he's at home as the governor when Ricky Ray Rector is executed. And he says, they won't get me as soft on crime. So when it comes to, if we're talking Labour, then we've got Diane Abbott and we've got Pfizer, and we have the way that they ran the campaign in Batley and Spen, the by-election, an entire history of contempt, which means that black and brown people look at them and think, if it's going to be the lesser of two evils, I'll go with this evil rather than that evil.
I think the other thing I just want to name that maybe is like obvious to us, but not to some of our paler podcasting counterparts, is like this shock and revulsion and pearl clutching of, well, how on earth could you vote for someone who associates with racists? A lot of us through our daily jobs and lives, and if we're in racially mixed families, put up with a lot of comments like that. A lot of us put up with a lot of treatment like that from the progressive parties that claim to represent us. So like sucking it up and accepting that like people might make off-key comments, might be ignorant, might like racially profile, like that's kind of the bread and butter. So it's not that big a hill to climb to vote for someone who says off-key things when a lot of being a non-white person is kind of this daily calibration of like, oh, is this person, am I going to call out this comment? Did this person like physically step back from me because of my race? Like the way that racial identity functions is often a series of like compromises and trials. Yeah, I guess it doesn't seem that interesting to me that black and brown people could vote for Donald Trump, even if he's got a proven track record of making off-key comments, supporting racist people, is basically for white people and like has been for his entire life.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said. And I think, what the fuck are you doing?
Oh my God, yeah,
are you doing?
Yeah.
Like
bananas.
Like, did you? I mean, I also feel like, did you not hear what you just said? Like, not that it's the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you. I agree with everything you're saying here. I often have this conversation with people who say, well, if you do that, it can be triggering. And I think if that's the worst thing that happened to a black person this year, then they're blessed. Do you know what I mean? Just me quoting somebody else in an academic talk using the N-word and being told, well, you shouldn't really do that because it could be triggered. And I'm like, okay, I won't do it because you asked me not to do it. But I do think, I hear this person, but I don't think that any different than, it's no more complicated than the fact that it looks like certainly a plurality and maybe a majority of white women voted for Trump, even though everything he said about abortion, everything he said about sexual misconduct and so on. And it's like, look, people are complicated and they have more than one set of interests. And I think my experience in interviewing women who voted for Trump, white women, I didn't meet any black women who did, although they do exist, was men are disgusting. That is like, yeah, he's being a disgusting man. And like I said, I wouldn't want him near my daughters, but we've been dealing with this for a while.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. And it is worth saying this result is awful and scary. And yeah, every time I looked at a vox pop of a black guy at a Trump rally, it is shocking. I disagree with all the people that voted for Donald Trump. I just think we have to move past the kind of liberal optimism that can count on all people of color to vote left. So just, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, have more babies and like shit will be calm. Provably false. And I am a little confused about people voting for him, even though it doesn't seem that he's super keen on them. But then that argument could be made for working class people. Like he's pretty clearly for rich people. And again, we don't have the data, but it looks like a ton of working class people voted for him. He's literally got Elon Musk on stage. Like he's for the billionaires. So yeah, it's all gross and horrible and tragic. But I don't think in this, I don't know, soul-searching analysis post-election period, I don't want to just hear about people of color and like, what have they done? Like, what has everyone done?
My over is that we have to get over treating it as an aberration. His election. Now, we have seen everything he can do. You could have said in 2016, you could have said who knew. But now we know. We've seen January the 6th. The fact he's a felon bothers me less because lots of black people are felons, and I don't like the American court system and so on is terrible. The things he's been accused of are serious. It's not shoplifting, it's vote tampering, it's election tampering, as well as sexual harassment and so on and so forth. We know who he is, and they voted for it. They voted for it big time. He won the popular vote. That's the first time a Republican has won the popular vote since 2004. That was the first time in 2004 that a Republican won it since 1988. He didn't win by a little bit, he won by a lot. We have to stop understanding this as an aberration. This is what American electoral politics is now and arguably has been for some time. It's not what America is, and I want to emphasize that. America is better than that, I think. It's not even what American politics is. American politics also includes Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Occupy Wall Street, a range of resistances and so on. But it is what American electoral politics is, where money chooses the candidates, and then we get a choice between the two people that money thinks is possible. The reason why Kamala Harris came in so late was because of the way that American electoral politics works, which meant that Joe Biden could hold his pie in the whole country to ransom until it became untenable. The reason why Gaza was barely on the ballot, and when it was done in such a disgusting way, with Clinton and Obama basically explaining why Palestinians had to be kind of eliminated, was unacceptable. The choice wasn't there. That Kamala Harris stood, as Keir Starmer stood, as John Kerry stood, as just not being the Republican. That was her agenda. And she thought that that would be enough. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't enough to win, but it's not enough to deliver. And so this is not an aberration. This is a country 200 years a slave state, more, 100 years a segregated state, an apartheid state, only 60 years a non-racial democracy. This is what it looks like.
So when you say that it's not an aberration, do you mean like that all of the undercurrents? Because I think the thing that's interesting to me is that almost if you view Trump as separate or different, then you deny and ignore just the reality of American history and present. The thing I do find interesting is that like money so clearly shaped so much of it, but she had so much money and it wasn't enough to determine the result. Yeah, the thing that seemed interesting to me was it wasn't about who had the most money, although the interest of money arguably won if you look at all of the stock market.
I don't think money by itself determines the winner, but I think money determines who can compete. Money shapes the choice. We get to choose between two people who are backed by rich people. So money in itself doesn't shape the winner. And we know from Bloomberg, from Forbes, Ross Perot was another one, that money in itself won't do it. But you can't compete without the money.
You were in America when the Tea Party,
like
the other thing that made me think of it as well is that this pearl clutching centrist commentariat, oh my gosh, Trump, so awful, so distasteful. Does Trump feel like the continuation or the evolution of the Tea Party? Like, is this just a political tradition that has long been in America and now has a very visible figurehead?
Absolutely.
You think it's something different?
Yes, it does. And I will put in the newsletter, which you should all subscribe to, a video that I did from Pahrump, Nevada in 2010. It's a group of Tea Party types in the back of a casino who meet every week, and they have this breakfast and they kind of talk about whatever's on their mind. And the video starts with a discussion about when it will be okay to take up arms against Obama. There are some people saying we have to keep our powder dry. There are other people saying we have to get ready. But they believe that he is violating the Constitution. All but one or two believe he wasn't born in America. And they are talking about what 10 or 11 years later would be the January 6th insurrection. When can we use our arms against this elected government? And there is a debate. So there are people saying, that's crazy. We haven't existed all possible means. But it is also a very real discussion in which people are saying, well, then the question is when and not whether. He's a product of American racism and American oligarchy. He's not the creator of it. And so he steps into these anxieties, and he is in a sense, the kind of obvious retort to the Obama years, which is he couldn't be more American in the typical understanding of what American is, in the same way that Obama couldn't be less American in the standard version of what someone who would be president would be. And he's saying, I will deliver. These people don't deliver. Where Obama sees nuance, he sees black and white. Yeah, this has been coming for a while. The Democratic response until 2016, I would say, was we can manage capitalism better than them. We will manage a fairer capitalism. It will look like a Benetton ad. His 2016 victory did blow a lot of that out of the water in terms of they are now more strident on gun control than they were. They are more strident on abortion than they were, but that's because the abortion rights are gone. They have become better in a range of things and more vocally in support of black and brown rights, vocally in support of, but legislatively not delivering a huge amount.
Yeah, and I completely agree that if you view it as an aberration, you don't really understand what's happening and you're kind of lying to yourself. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot is Trump has a really coherent story about America, but also about the economy. I believe it to be factually, provably false, but I think competing against a candidate who, even if you find him morally repugnant, is known, is appealing, has a really strong political brand that can withstand gaffes and missteps, because that's not what he's offering. He's offering strength and simplicity. There's a really clear story about what's wrong, who's to blame, and how we fix it. And the Democrats, and especially centrist Democrats, have a bunch of numbers being well, we've got inflation down and the economy, the fundamentals of the economy are really strong. In terms of what Biden's handing over to Trump, that may factually be true, but if people feel the economy is bad and they feel that the Democrats haven't done enough and the Democrats don't have a story to tell, and I mean, maybe this is me falling into the camp that a lot of people do, which is something happened that I don't like. Let me tell you about my pre-existing political opinions and explain why that fixes everything. But if progressives just want to be centrist, they don't want to articulate a different vision of the world, then the best bet they've got is to wait for everyone to get tired of right-wing people a la Keir Starmer and then pop up at the ballot box. But if you want to win big and win a mandate, you have to tell a story and connect emotionally with people about the country that you're in, the economy that you want to lead. And you need to have something that isn't a set of numbers in response to, this is because of all the immigrants. We have got some messages from listeners. I love listener messages. We have an email from Fee. Hi, Fee. I love your podcast. It looks at the big news and the news we really should be thinking about. It's good to hear opinion that bothers to highlight the needs of those that have little, rather than always pampering attention to the few. I was wondering if you could give us a shout out. We're a group of Manchester early intervention and psychosis staff who are currently on strike to highlight dangerous staffing levels and lack of investment into secondary care, community mental health services. We know too well the distress associated with inadequate mental health services, and we would really appreciate an opportunity for spreading the message of our cause. Well, you're getting a massive shout out from us. You're doing such amazing work on mental health in really, really tough conditions. I can't imagine how tough it is to also be on strike. Big shout out from the Over Under team. Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you for your work, and thank you for withdrawing your labour in order to advance your work. That's one of the things people often don't understand about people, particularly in the medical profession and caring professions, is that when they strike, generally is in order to protect the service they're providing, not to line their own pockets. So we salute you on many levels. Thank you, Fee.
We also want to give a big shout out to the people who signed up to Patreon this week. Nikki, David, Kate, Bronwyn, John, Abby, Ken, Juliana, Gronya, Rachel, Sandra, Jill, Rachel, another Rachel, Nina, or one Rachel twice, Tamsin and Melanie. Thank you so much to all of you for supporting us on Patreon and for, reaching into your pockets and paying for the podcast to exist.
Yeah, we have 323 paying Patreon supporters now, and thank you to all of those that have helped. But we now have a new target of 400 supporters to reach by Christmas Day. That's the 25th of December, in case you don't know when Christmas Day is. Packages start at just £3 a month, so if you want to keep the show running and access our weekly bonus episodes, weekly newsletter, exclusive over-under WhatsApp community, an awesome place to be. Search Over the Top Under the Radar on Patreon and put your money where your ears are.
So my under the radar, moving slightly away from US politics, although not entirely, is Kemi Badenoch. So for those of you who missed it, because the Tories chose to end their leadership contest in the middle of the US presidential election campaign, on the weekend, Kemi Badenoch was elected the new leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the opposition. Kemi is not someone who has flown under the radar really ever since she entered politics. But I do think that because we're all glued to what's happening in the US and because probably we're all a bit sick of Tory party factions and fighting, that we are slightly sleeping on Kemi. And I think that there's been a lot of focus on what it means to have a Black woman leading the Conservative Party. And then I think not enough focus on her and the threat that she poses electorally. Specifically, there was a big fury about a Dawn Butler tweet. There's been a lot of conversation about what it means that the Tories have elected a fourth woman to lead the party when Labour has never really elected anyone to lead the party. We have had female leaders, but generally it's caretakers. I mean, I don't know, we need a lot of conversation about that. It means the Labour Party is more sexist than the Conservative Party when it comes to leaders. The main reason I worry about Kemi is, I think similarly to Trump, I think a lot of political commentators have underestimated her or thought she was a bit ridiculous, or again, similarly to Trump, think that there is some gotcha moment where you can find something outrageous that she said, see her comments about maternity leave, autistic children, working in McDonald's, making you working class. And these are ridiculous things, to be clear, and we have laughed about them on the podcast. But I think at this point, we need to stop laughing and start taking her a bit more seriously. If the Trump thing has shown us anything, it's that if you have the right political brand, you can say all manner of nonsense. It doesn't hit you. It doesn't touch the sides. We also know this from Farage, from Boris Johnson. And I think that, I mean, we can talk a lot about the process that arrived to her being elected, but I think the fact that the Conservative MPs and the Conservative membership can see past that, there is something they're seeing that I think we should be worried about. And I watched her first PMQ's appearance against Keir Starmer, and I didn't think, whoa there, we've lost the next election. But she looked pretty confident. She picked smart questions, and he didn't know how to deal with her.
I have one question, which is, can we not both laugh at her and critique her? Because it's really difficult to talk about her sometimes with a straight face.
Oh, we're allowed to laugh at her. I think we also have to take her seriously.
Yes,
but
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, first of all, the symbolic nature of her victory is just something that, for God's sake, can we get over that? Can we be more mature about these things in terms of, look, there is a symbolic resonance. It's not hard to understand. If Kamala Harris had won, there would have been some symbolic resonance. If Kemi Badenoch wins, there is symbolic resonance around a Black woman in a position like that. You can't just support diversity and representation when it supports you. But once we understand that it's symbolic, then we can talk about the value of that symbol and we can divorce it from substance. She herself has said, Britain is the best place to be Black. People treat you by what you do, not by your label. So she herself has said, this is nothing. This is nothing, because there's no racism anyway. Her victory, as far as she's concerned, didn't mean anything. I'm more, in some senses, more invested in her symbolism than she is. So we have to get over this. We've had Rishi Sunak, we've had Barack Obama, we've had Kamala Harris, we've had now Kemi Badenoch. We have to stop doing this thing where we say, well, does this mean that racism's over? Or that just goes to show, after the summer we've had, Obviously, it doesn't go to show that we are post-racial society. Obviously not. And that was always true, but for God's sake, timing. So there's that. And then there's her agenda. She is fairly equal opportunities toxic. She's toxic about women, about autistic people, about Black people, about Muslims. She can do the full gamut. And as you say, that is not a barrier to success. And we know from actually what happened earlier in the year with Starmer's victory, that the fact that the Tories are so far behind doesn't mean that she couldn't be the Prime Minister next time. Labour's victory that whole campaign was run on empty calories. It was a very low vote. It was a victory of electoral technicians who got the right votes in the right places, but they got less votes than Corbyn. Starmer's already less popular than Sunak was. So she's serious. She's ridiculous. She's also serious. And the threat that she poses is serious. And we have to understand the agenda of this party is about to take a significant shift to the right. She's more right-wing than Sunak was. And she's not going for people they lost to Labour. She's going for people they lost to Reform.
This is a hard one to sort of fully pin down, but I think the thing that she has that other figures in British politics have had, and that, you know, figures in other countries have, I think there's a sort of authenticity to her, a like no nonsense, you know, I'm just cutting the crap and getting shit done, which feels authentic, but also is a strong brand. And like, it's kind of Thatcherite. I'm so loath to compare any Conservative to Margaret Thatcher because it feels like all of their wet dreams. And obviously, famously, Liz Truss was cosplaying Margaret Thatcher anytime she could post a picture to Instagram. But weirdly, there is something Thatcherite to me about Kemi's sort of performative, belligerent, well, I don't care what they say, I'm just going to speak the truth and say it was terrifying growing up in socialist Nigeria. Sidebar, the most ridiculous thing, given we're still allowed to laugh about her, the idea that she grew up that Nigeria was this socialist country and that's why she went to bed in fear every night. I'm sorry, and no shade to Nigerians. I love my West African family. But Nigeria has at no point been a socialist country. It is arguably a very nakedly capitalist country. So, yeah, I mean, she lies and like twists things. But the thing that concerned me watching all of PMQs, which is something I do not recommend and I do not plan to do again for a while, was that Kemi's questions were super focused around Trump, around Lammy. Sidebar, I wonder how long David Lammy will keep his job, given the things he said about Donald Trump and given how quick Keir Starmer is to throw people of colour under the bus. But like, they were really targeted about Trump to get cut through, to make Labour uncomfortable. And then Labour had lined up a series of questions. For those who don't watch PMQs, you sort of plant questions. So various Labour backbenchers were standing up saying things like, don't you agree, Keir Starmer, that we should support autistic children, unlike what Kemi Badenoch said about autistic children? And again, it's like, you're playing the wrong game. She says outrageous and ridiculous things all the time. That's part of her brand. Unless she says something truly wild, you're not going to find some gotcha moment from picking out from all of the nonsense and wahala that she says, something that's going to suddenly make her not qualified for this job. She has this job. And she's very focused on getting the next job, which is Prime Minister. Yeah, there's very, very little that I can say about Kemi Badenoch that isn't negative, but like, underestimate her at your peril. I mean, Black women are constantly underestimated, but I really think people don't get what she's doing and the threat that she poses. What's your under, Gary? What's gone under the radar?
Well, it's and this won't seem hopeful, but ultimately I think it is. It starts with a sad story, which is the death of Paul Stephenson. Paul Stephenson was a man born in Essex in 1937 who led the Bristol bus boycott, the historic bus boycott, which rallied thousands of Bristolians to stand together against the Bristol Omnibus Company, which was refusing to hire Black and Asian drivers. With union support, I should add, that they were refusing to hire Black and Asian drivers. And he led a boycott of the bus company over several months. He won. The first bus conductor, I think it was, in Bristol was a Sikh guy, an Asian guy certainly. His victory in 1963 paved the way for the country's first Race Relations Act. Paul Stephenson, he was the first black social worker in the city of Bristol. His activism didn't stop there. He was arrested at the Bay Horse pub in Bristol when he refused to leave after the bartender wouldn't serve him. So a badass who walked the walk. Now, there are a few things about Paul's story which I think are really important. The first is he was born in Essex in 1937, pre-Windrush, pre-Second World War. That part of the British experience, there is a notion out there that basically Windrush was the beginning of black people in Britain, and it wasn't. And Paul, whose dad was a West African student, whose mum was white, was an illustration of that. And he was part of that generation of black people. And I'm thinking here also of, among others, Reverend Wilfred Wood, Olive Morris, Claudia Jones. There are a load of them, and I'm missing so many of them out. Ras McConan. The roll call could go on, who fought, often in very lonely circumstances, at a time when racism, let alone institutional systemic racism, wasn't something that was widely being discussed, when there was no law against excluding black people from anything. You could just say, well, you can't have the room because you're black, or we won't employ you because you're black. And that was it. And that we have to salute them. We have to. Otherwise, it's like people keep thinking they invented anti-racism and that each new generation thinks that they were the first, and we weren't. We stand in a story of people like Paul Stephenson, and we stand on their shoulders. And the things that we have, it's easy to take for granted without understanding that someone came before us and fought for us. Without knowing our name, they fought for us and they won for us, and that's why we can X, Y, Z. Paul Stephenson would be a pioneer in that regard over the last century. It's important to understand that while it wasn't the same as the American civil rights movement, we have a civil rights movement of our own here in Britain. We also had a civil rights movement in the colonies, which was, in some ways far bigger if we think of Ghana and India and so on. But we have had people fighting for civil rights here for years and fighting against racism and fascism for years. Paul Stephenson was a pioneer. He didn't invent it, but he was a pioneer in that regard. And then the third thing on a week like this is to understand is that good things do come out of America. If it's Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, Me Too. Paul got the idea for the bus boycott after the March on Washington in 1963. And he looked at what was going on in America. He wrote this himself in his book, Memoirs of a Black Englishman. He says, I was walking across the Downs and I thought, if they can do it, we can do it. And it speaks to an inspiration that people can draw from and have drawn from Black America.
It's a great under the radar, and sending condolences and well wishes to Paul's family. I think he's got 2 children that have survived him. Maybe he's got grandchildren too. And it is really sad he died. But yeah, I think he's the definition of a life well lived. And we will definitely put links about him in the newsletter and maybe on socials. We're very quick to outsource racism to America and other countries because we're the ones that ended slavery. But actually, there was a civil rights movement here. It resulted in, among other things, the 1965 Race Relations Act. And yeah, it was a lot of unsung heroes, people like Paul, who definitely died having made the world a much better place. And I think you're right. It's important that we find and remind ourselves of our heroes, but also to remember that a lot of the heroic work that has enabled people like you and I to live the lives we do is done by people who aren't huge celebrities, who didn't have a 5-book deal, or, TikTok probably didn't exist for most of Paul's life, but people who just saw injustice and said, that's not right, and I'm going to do something about it. He's a real one, a real icon. And he also served in the RAF, lived in South London for a while. I think he brought Muhammad Ali to Tulse Hill, which, come on, South Londoners, that's iconic.
I love the way you brought South London into that.
It was relevant, Gary. It was relevant. Yeah. Sure. Bristol was also relevant, probably more significant in his life story, but he did live in South London for a time.
Yeah. No Stevenage connection, I don't think, but I'm going to.
Yeah, that will work. Maybe you went through on the bus or a train once, but no. It's also, I think it is really, we talked about this, we have a group chat and we think about what we're going to talk about. And we knew we were going to talk about the election. It it hurts, right? It's a blow. You feel a bit less safe. You feel a bit more worried, and we need to hold each other close and also remember how far we've come and what we've done and what people like Paul have done. So yeah, I think it's a good under, and we're all allowed to feel sad and angry and scared, and we all at some point have to pick ourselves up and do what people like Paul did and just say, okay, but we can push the boulder up the hill, or whatever metaphor you want for fixing injustices.
Mostly we're still here, and our lives have been born from resistance and shaped by resistance, and we will still resist. I can't remember who it was who more or less said, if there's no dancing, then I'm not coming to the revolution. But we have to maintain joy in our lives. We have to. This isn't the first time things have looked bleak. And we also have to dust ourselves off, get out and start fighting again. Because the world that we want, more apparent now than ever, is not going to come about through us wishing that it would. So let's get out there. Thanks for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts.
If you want to support the show, get on the WhatsApp group, get bonus episodes, you can support us on Patreon by searching Over the Top, Under the Radar on the Patreon website.
You can sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
And we're on all the socials, or most of the socials. You can connect with us on social media at over_under_pod_.